All right.
We're just not going to hold back here. Is that the plan?
Well, no. We are kind of.
Okay.
So, hey guys. So welcome back to the Desire line. As you can see, there's a sense in which I am flying solo today. My compadre in arms is not with me because she had an emergency that she had to attend to. That being said, look at this cohort I've assembled here to make up. Between the four of them, we'll hope that they can approach her absence, right? But we have the Swords and Stereo crew of Bold City Longsword, and why don't we? Well, so we'll talk. I'm gonna start with you, Keith, because we met kind of first at I ended up meeting everybody eventually, but you and I met because I was vending at this latest historical fencing event that we were both in attendance of, and so tell us a little bit about what you were doing there and just what your project is and all that kind of jazz.
I mean, I was there to stab people. So I'm Keith. I've been doing rapier for a while, and Surfo is my big event that I make sure to go to because it's got all the rapier tournaments in the Southeast, basically.
Yeah.
When I recognized this gentleman over here,
hey, you did that well. You did a good job with that.
Had to come by and say hi and spread a little love because I enjoy this content as well as putting out my own.
Right. Awesome. And I'm going to come back to what all it is that you do as a rapierist, in a dearth of rapier fencing. There's not so much that goes on down by where you are, but yet you've managed to make that sort of the meat of your practice, right? So, but that'll be an interesting discussion. But then later, sort of the weekend had gone by, and you guys had all gotten a bed and breakfast with basically everyone else from the South, an Airbnb with everyone from Josh Farrat and Anthony Bonomo and a bunch of other craziness, the people that I didn't get a chance to meet, but that's where I met Lucas and Matt and Johan, and we were talking on the porch. That was some crazy scenery that we had there, huh? Holy,
well, literally the title of the booking was about the view.
Yeah, right. But then so we ended up having a conversation on the back deck, looking out on this crazy majestic view of, I can only assume that was Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in Marietta on the top of this hill, looking kind of over across the forest into the Atlanta skyline. It was just glorious. But we ended up having a lot of really interesting conversations, just about everything. And I thought, man, and as far as I know, there's only a handful of these historical fencing podcasts. I guess the running joke with us here is that it's only nominally a historical fencing podcast, but I thought, man, we got to get all you guys together. So Lucas, you were out there. Tell us, or tell the audience, about yourself and how it is that you got into HEMA and what all you were doing there.
Oh my gosh, I can never remember. How long have we been doing this, Matt? It's like 8 years, 9 years.
Yes, since 2015.
So, Matt called me up from the park one day, and I think this is episode 1 of our podcast, isn't it? Yeah. So anybody can go read that for the long version. Cliff notes. Matt said, "Get your ass to the park. There's sword fighting happening." And then X amount of years later, Matt's owner operator of Bold City Longsword, and I come in when I can to help coach and teach and.
So you were the first, you were the first official member, aside for the two of you kind of co-founded it. Right?
I think it may be it's between me and Keith. I don't know.
We actually
I
stole
predate
this
Wolf City
club.
Longsword. So
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt. You were saying
We actually stole our HEMA club. There was another HEMA club in place in Jacksonville, and the guy running it got a new job, and he just kind of set down his football, and I picked it up and ran away. So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
yeah, so like there was already like a meeting time and regular people, and he was like, "I'm going to close this down," and I was like, "The fuck you are! I just spent all this money on gear." And so I was like, no, we're coming back next week. Everyone just keep coming.
Right. And then finally, Johan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of where you see yourself in this sort of mess of things. I'm
the late period addition. Like I joined in 2018, so like not only was there already an established Bolt City Longsword, but we had our indoor location and the current business model and all of that in place already. So was just part of that generation of students, and I have not stopped coming.
Yeah.
And has become an instructor now.
Right.
I help coach. Yeah.
Sure. That's interesting. That's an interesting, like, we might get to talking about that, like the difference between what it means to coach or what it means to instruct, because I think that there's relevance there. But real quick, so then you guys started the podcast, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about how that all transpired. Like, what was it, and then looking back, how clear of a picture did you have of what it was going to become?
Matt brought it up enough that we couldn't ignore it anymore, and we started doing a podcast.
we didn't. I didn't have any plan really. It was class would end, and then we would sit around and have these amazing conversations. And I was like, it's not fair for us to bogart this from the rest of the world.
We were denying the world.
We were denying the world our company is what it basically came down to. And I don't know, me and Lucas did the first two on a joke. We were just like, well, let's just record it and see how stupid we sound.
Let's have 1 to 6 beers and
oh yeah, we were. And then and I also filmed. We used to share our space with the Kung Fu school, and that instructor, the guy who ran that school, he would come to our messer class to spar, and I was like, I really want to talk to him about that. So I invited him over to my house, and we had like an hour and a half conversation just
Kung
about
Fu
Kung Fu Kevin, about his the sparring culture in the Eastern martial arts and what he thought, what he really liked about how we were doing our club and the differences between our club and his school. And that I think that was the one that was just like, I was like, yeah, we definitely should put this out. So I'll put out the ones with the dick jokes too. And
which ones are the ones with the dick jokes, Matt?
It's 90% of them.
So when I left the balcony, right? Because I think what happened was we were out there for like 40 minutes or whatever, and then people that I had come with that had invited me to go get some dinner were done cleaning up, and so I was getting out of there, and I was like, I immediately texted Jesse, and I was like, so these guys are out there and they're like talking about what we're saying in our podcast. She's like, what the fuck? And I was like, yeah. And they've got their own podcast and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, and we are totally having them. And she's pretty game, she's just kind of a game person or whatever. And I was like, I told him to hold back on the dick jokes. And she was like,
Not gonna lie, it's a struggle here.
You're doing a good job, man.
Yeah. Well, Matt and I have known each other for how long?
It's been a while. It's like since 05.
That's when you blew me up in that D&D game.
Yeah. I killed him the night we met, and we've been friends ever since.
Right
so we've known each other for so long. We're just so casual together. So
well, and you also, you kind of grew up together, and so there was that part of your that part of your life where it was, more, we'll say, more appropriate to behave that way. You just, right?
I would say we're still growing up together.
Yeah.
They're trying.
All right. So anyway, so here we are, and we're I think I love what you're saying, Matthew, about the you just have these conversations, and they're so damn interesting, right? They're just so there's it feels like there's so much value, and one of the issues that I have with sort of the HEMA community is that we're in this constant state of trying to understand ourselves, so like I do other martial arts, and I do other combat sports, we'll say. These are just names that we give things, but like I do BJJ, and I do boxing and kickboxing on occasion, and I do a lot of wrestling, and those spaces, we'll say, they don't seem to have the same kind of struggle that we have, right? You're doing BJJ. Well, what really is BJJ? I don't know. It's a fucking game, man. Like you're playing this game, and you're like trying to submit the other person. That's the game. And HEMA is not the game, because we don't have a game. We have like several games or various approaches that don't even well that don't even integrate like the game part of it.
You're just talking about the technical aspect of the different martial arts, or are you going into the culture as well?
Well, right. So so intellectually, I think as HEMAists, or people who are interested in historical fencing, part of what that means is to ask that question, right? Like, what are we doing? What is this? What are these arts that we're trying to reconstruct? What are the contextual pieces that are going to radically inform our interpretations in a way that could result in varying and radically different interpretations, right? Does that make sense? And so but one of the, because we're always searching for what it is that we are, or what the hell we're doing, right? It makes conversations kind of accessible that wouldn't otherwise be, right? So Matt, you do.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like for instance, in BJJ, right? So doing BJJ on a regular basis, like no one would say, but what is really the truth about the nature of BJJ? Like that's just an absurd.
No one says it now, but if you go back to the late '80s, early '90s, they were saying it.
Maybe,
yeah, that's true.
Then the UFC kind of pigeonholed it and put it in a spot where these are what we should be working on. But when in the '80s and '90s and up into the early 2000s, people were saying that, like, should it be self-defense? Should it be this point game? Should there be time limit? Should it be submission only? And I mean, people are still having those conversations. It's just the people they're having the conversations with don't care what their answer is, because they've already made up their mind. No one in HEMA's made up their mind yet.
It's become like dogmatic almost.
Yeah, like
this is the way BJJ should be, or karate, or taekwondo.
I've switched. I've trained at 3 different BJJ schools, and all 3 of them treated it different, even though we were doing the exact same drill.
Right. So, and could talk a little bit about that. Like, if you don't mind, go into some of the detail, just the varying approaches.
Well, so when I started, before I learned what HEMA was and couldn't find a school here in Jacksonville, so I started doing Krav Maga instead, because it was the only art that would let you train weapons from the very beginning. A lot of the other martial arts, they wanted you to level up, or to achieve some kind of achievement before they would hand you the weapon.
You got to get your blue belt before you can touch a bow staff.
Something like that. And the Krav Center didn't do that. And then the Krav Center started teaching BJJ on the weekends. It was like it was 1 hour-and-a-half class a week, but they trained it with the Krav Maga mentality. They didn't care. They never said the word points. It was purely self-defense.
How deep can you get your thumb in that guy's eye socket?
Sure.
Well, you have an arm bar.
Both knuckles. And then that they stopped teaching BJJ there and that had become my favorite part. So I moved to 10th Planet, which is no gi, and they're very competition focused, and they're doing stuff that they would never have done in the self-defense school. Like, you don't go deep half guard in a street fight. You're just going to get your head punched, so like the mentality was different, and why they were training was different. Which overall made the school culture different.
I think that's actually, you hit on something there. I think we've gotten a little bit more precise with this distinction. It's that, when you have a school and they start offering some kind of curriculum, BJJ or whatever, right? So like the 10th Planet guys are running off of a philosophy that's been put forward by an instructor who has a very clear idea about what he wants to achieve with the application of this sport/art, right? And so I think for the most part, after a couple of weeks training at 10th Planet, you have a clear picture of what the hell's going on. Like, why you're there, what this stuff is aimed to achieve. And you might even be able to start to parse out how some of this stuff doesn't maybe work in other particular contexts, but there's no question. And I don't feel like there's no insecurity about what it is that you're doing there, right? Like a student who comes, like, they feel comfortable, they feel confident that what they're getting is optimally designed for the particular thing that they're trying to achieve. And that was also true in a sense of the Krav Maga school, right? And that's a little bit fuzzier because you're training for these situations that hopefully you never find yourself in any kind of situation that resembles a context that Krav Maga is training you for, right? Sticking your hand in somebody's eyeball.
I've always found that that's a strength of HEMA, because like at the end of the day, like all of those, like BJJ, even though like some schools are very sport oriented, there's still a very like self-defense, real fighting mentality to it.
Yeah.
That like, and especially in Krav Maga, like if your instructor didn't come from the Israeli military and like has he killed a dude, like, oh, then I don't think I can trust him.
Right.
So there's like, and you see it all over the internet of like, oh, this is for real fights, that's not, blah blah blah. This works in the streets, and we get a little of that in HEMA,
right? But
nobody's really out there having sword fights.
Well, and also,
so like, you never have that argument of like, oh, I've done this for real.
You never have the argument of what if they were real swords, Keith?
Well, the what if, yes, but you don't have the posturing of like, I've been in 8 sword fights.
No, we had that one guy at the comic tournament who came in there. He said he was a South American machete fighter, and he had scars all over him.
We get a different sort of posturing.
Well, yeah, man, we passed that guy around. That was entertaining.
I mean, you have that fantasy of being the best sword fighter that a lot of people want to live up to. So I feel like we still get a flavor of posturing and just general misunderstanding of what we do, but for different reasons.
So I have so many things to say. I'm just thinking about like that guy. I was teaching a class at an event, and I asked a rhetorical sort of, has anyone ever seen somebody get hacked? So unfortunately, what we do is like, we're simulating weapons combat. And we're trying to have a real conversation about what that is. And so like I asked, has anyone ever seen sort of like this, the way that this violence works in the real world? We'll say something that you might see in the third world, where every citizen is just walking around with a 3-foot machete, right? Like whatever. And somebody in the crowd was like, I have. It's just like, you weren't supposed to answer that.
Did he explain himself?
No, I moved on.
Okay, just veered off.
I moved as far past that as I could, because that was not the conversation I wanted to have. But all right. So Johan, you are right. So we do have this sort of romantic sense of what being sort of the best swordsman or the ultimate swordsman is, right? I mean, it probably couldn't come up with what that means, right? If someone pressed you on it, you'd probably be wishy-washy for about 15 minutes and then not have said anything.
Because it's a ridiculous notion. Yeah.
Well, right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. But it is something kind of maybe inherent to our humanity, or something that we just sort of like, we tend to romanticize and idealize, what the platonic ultimate swordsman might be or look like. But go ahead.
Well, and I think that's an idea that we get early on. I mean, most of us are nerds. So
Yeah.
we're watching, Legend with Tom Cruise and playing Zelda when we're kids. So like, we've been thinking about sword fighting our whole lives. We just didn't know it until we picked up the sword. Yeah. And then we're like, this is all that stuff, all that emotion and feelings that you've connected to that other stuff, all of a sudden is right there in your hands. And you're like, I could be the greatest swordsman that ever lived.
Yeah, but then you pick up a rapier and have one bout against Keith and get your face rocket slothed off. Like, oh, there's levels to this.
Yeah.
And then I spend 10 minutes assuring you that there's many, many more levels after me.
Yeah.
Well, and we've had those people come into the school, have that fantasy crushed, realized it was hard work, and they weren't magically good, and then just never come back.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's something worth talking about too, for sure. Okay. So let's dial it back for a second. So we're talking about
rein us in.
Yeah, well, no. We're doing. I feel like we're doing great right now.
Okay.
But I want to keep some kind of coherence to this, because really what it is that I'm interested in all of you guys for a bunch of different reasons, and I want to talk to you about it. So we've been talking about HEMA, what it means to do HEMA, and then like what some of the cultural aspects of doing HEMA and how they lead to certain approaches, or lead to certain questions, lead to certain conversations, right? But now, Keith, you there's a sense in which your practice predates HEMA, right? And at least so far as I understand it, I don't want to misrepresent.
At least the term HEMA, yeah.
Right. Well, right, exactly. And so tell us about how how it was that, I mean, shit, I could sit here and listen to you talk about this all for the rest of the podcast. So whatever it was, it started you on your swordsmanship journey. And then B, when you started doing HEMA the way that you understand it, right? And then how you viewed the transformation, because you were present during the transformation of practices of swordsmanship to what becomes HEMA, but then also you're watching it from the perspective of someone who's engaged with the SCA and still practicing in the SCA kind of regularly, right? But then you start doing HEMA, trademark capital HEMA, right, as well. And so you've got this sort of unbelievably in-depth perspective that I'd love to hear you just break down for everybody else.
So I started with the SCA in 2001. They were the only game in town, and after years of doing martial arts, and like Matt said, nobody wants to just like have you sign up at their school and hand you a sword. And then all the ones I was interested in, once you finally got that sword in your hand, it was okay. We're going to do some forms now. I want a sword fight. So I stumbled into an SCA fighter practice, and they had rapier going on. And it was just like, okay, well, this is what I'm doing now. And I walked over and I was like, how do I get involved? What paperwork do I need to sign? I'm down. and they haven't been able to get rid of me. So a few years into that, I started really trying to be better than a tall, skinny 18-year-old. That I'd seen some success, but I'm like, there's a much bigger pool out there, and I'm not that good. But everybody was essentially just doing epee because that's what we had to work with. Because back then, there was no YouTube, there was no Google, and that there were forums, but I hadn't found them yet. So I was looking for material or like even just an instructor, and there was nobody around. And I stumbled on Arma, didn't like their model, and then so I knew that and like WMA were out there, but nothing around here. So I just was trying to do the best I could for a while. Eventually got a hold of like William Wilson.
So are you like, do you have access to material at this point? You like
no, up until like the first book I ever read that talked about like historical fencing legitimately was the Tattersall book by William Wilson. And I found one of John Clement's books and was just like, oh sure, it's cheap, I'll pick it up. And then realized, yeah, it's a good thing I dodged Arma.
Oh.
Well, I think the sort of the story with that book isn't, it's like, it's just not super coherent, right? You're not not getting.
For me, it was like the first third of it is all just saying how much everyone else is doing it wrong, and he specifically calls out the SCA, and then like misrepresents it because like, hey, I'm one of those guys, and you're not talking about the reality of where I'm at.
I think that's a really interesting.
Threw that in the trash.
I think that's a really interesting case study about how you can like compel people to find your perspective valuable. Like, don't shit on people with a bunch of straw men about what they do. Anyway, sorry. So you got Tattershall's book. Interestingly enough, I just spent the weekend in Baltimore, and I was hanging out with.
I wish I was there.
It was an excellent event. Do you know David Biggs?
Yeah, I've worked with him a little bit. He came to Surfo years back, and I got to do some virtual training with him like last year. Yeah, he's good people. Also SCA,
right?
As most of the good American rapier people are. But yeah, like I need to get up to Baltimore's at some point, but it's just right after Surfo, and I ended up going to a little tournament in Orlando instead, because 2 hours or 10 hours,
yeah,
I'll take the easy win. So yeah, I was really hurting for material, and I didn't have anybody around me who was working on it. Anybody who could like really teach me. So I wasted a lot of years just banging around trying stuff until I started eventually finding material online. Once YouTube was a thing and Facebook, I could actually connect with people, see what they were doing. I started traveling, found David Koblenz and Owen Towns in Atlanta. Learned tons from both of them, and just started working down that path. And then eventually found a HEMA school in some guy's driveway that moved to the park eventually to try and capitalize on the SCA practice. And that's where I met Matt and Lucas.
Right. And so now, Matt, you started the school sort of focused on longsword. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the gentleman who was running it before me was doing longsword. My plan was to be the sword and buckler guy, and then he quit and like squashed that plans because now I had to learn longsword really, really fast. Luckily, Lucas learned it for me, and then just let me look at his notes. But longsword is it's the big draw. It's obviously not sport fencing. We have the most manuals and material for it. And that's what most of the other clubs are doing. So if you want to do events, it's the easiest to do events for. So I kept the club's focus on longsword. I'd really like to focus on wrestling, but no one wants to do that.
Right. Well, did you expand outward? Obviously you got Keith involved, and now, Keith's a walking rapier machine. So
so the plan with the previous guy, he had a club that he renamed to Steel Wind,
something like that. Yeah.
And changed the logo from like a Viking helmet to a longsword, a rapier, and a saber, because one of the guys that joined with me, helped me find the place, was a saber fencer. And so we were going to build the club off, okay, Christian teaches longsword, I'll teach rapier, and Chris can teach saber. And like I said, that's the iteration that Matt and Lucas joined. So then when Christian went away, I was still there as the rapier guy. And just Matt was like, I'm gonna rent a building. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And eventually, like, I was teaching the longsword classes just because I could be there, but eventually moved on to actually having a regularly scheduled rapier class.
That's awesome.
I wish y'all could have been there for that conversation with my wife when I was like, I'm going to rent a building to hang out with my friends. She's like, damn, you're serious.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a combination of the internet, the combination of, well, really, when I say the internet, I mean social media, right? Because theoretically, we had the internet back then too, right? But we just weren't connected. But everyone is so much more connected now, and we have more resources than we ever had in terms of material to study, right? If you're involved with the HEMA project, right? You guys have heard me, or I've discussed on this podcast a lot that I sort of have begun to view the HEMA project and swordsmanship more generally as two different sort of projects. Now, I'm not suggesting that one is better than the other, or that I invested in one or the other, but I think that it's useful for me to think about it that way. But regardless, like if you're engaged with the HEMA project as such, then having access to the materials and for free, right, with the Wichtenauer and stuff is super, super useful. But also you can just buy anything on Amazon now.
Yeah.
It's just, you couldn't do that back then. Like you can, like for the first time ever, I think you can buy a Fabris on Amazon, right? So, like, we had Tom Leone's translation, but that was on Lulu, and you had to find it.
That was a whole mission for years and years before the Lulu version. Oh,
right.
I would get bored every year or so and check and be like, oh, $2,600. I'm good.
Yeah. Right. And then the Vigiani was like in a PDF document that you had to like put the right Google search terms in. And it was, and if you put it in wrong, you're like, oh, they must have took it down because it's not coming up in my first 10 results in Google, or whatever. But yeah, so it's almost viable now to open up a space and create a little bit of a livelihood, right?
It's almost, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Livelihood is a strong word.
Right. You definitely have to.
Are present though. The resources are present though.
Yeah. Well, and the swords are present too, man.
Yeah.
So like, everybody has swords now. And actually, while we're talking about that, so Johan, so you came in at 2018. Everything had basically transformed by that point. So as far as you can tell, like this is the way things work. What did you notice? As you came in? Like, how did you view the community? How hard was it to find your place in it?
Not. I'm definitely of all present company, I'm positively spoiled. Like the community was pre-existing, the resources were accessible, and I mean, these guys are great. So like, it felt streamlined, really. Like everything's just at your fingertips. Put the work in, and that's as simple as that.
No, that's good. That's so interesting, because like, here's the deal. Like I wouldn't have thought about this, right? Like I just wouldn't have thought about like, what is it like for someone to join this community, whatever the hell it is, right, today, right? Where it's like you show up and your instructor's like, here's what you're working with. Here's the instructor. He's a great fencer. You can learn a lot from him. These are the books that we're studying. Here's the uniform that you can purchase. That's all going to be there. Here are the swords that you can purchase. They're made of steel, right? You can just order it tonight. It'll be there by the end of the weekend. like, holy moly, you know,
Yeah.
just 10 years ago. Right?
We're pretty much where the Eastern schools are now. Yeah, I mean, like, if we're not there, we're just one step away.
And we still have some stragglers, definitely.
Yeah, but that still has some problems with it too, because then you get that what people think a martial arts school should be mentality before they walk in. You know, like they're expecting Cobra Kai or some shit, and you know, and then when they find out we run, I don't know about other clubs, but we run our club like a damn bowling league or some kind of softball club. And like, it's a little, I think for some people it's a little off-putting, especially if they're younger and their parents are involved. You know, like, I'm not lining people up like Shaolin monks and making them punch 100 times.
It looks like a room full of ninjas, smoke bombs, and people repelling. And
not yet, anyway.
Well, but it's funny, Matt, because you've got experience working at a variety of other martial practices, right? Like doing work there, and so what you're describing in your own space is pretty different than what I expect, like your 10th Planet classes to have looked like.
Yeah. Well, and I've definitely cherry picked the stuff I liked from those, but I like our atmosphere better. Kung Fu Kevin even said he liked our atmosphere better, but he was training mostly tweens and teens. You know, he was training very young people, and we are training adults, and those people need to be spoon fed different things to make the knowledge go in. Preferably you don't want either one to get bored, but both of them groups get bored in different ways.
Oh, and the adults, you know, with few exceptions, they don't have a freaking discipline problem. They're not going to walk off the floor in the middle and piss off, to go water and make a phone call or whatever. They respect what's going on, so we don't have to. Get back in line and bow to your sensei.
People have some agency too, right? Like, people are like, all right, I'm here to do a thing. Like, I'm trying to do my work right now. You know what I mean? Like,
and they choose their own level of involvement, right? Like, I didn't ask Johan to be a teacher; he just did it, and I was like, "Well, fuck, okay, here." You know, like, Wednesday night's yours, man. You know, I'm happy you're here.
That's been from the beginning, right? Like, you didn't choose to pick up the mantle. It was
Yeah.
Like, opportunity.
But he didn't ask. It was just like, do it or don't do it. You know, so I did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, so here's a question. See, now I like my whole program that's it. It's over. I want to go back to Keith. How is your experience there different from what you experienced in the SCA? Like, what is the way the SCA, how do they practice swordsmanship? Sort of what, how do they drill? How do they train? How do they teach? What is their systems?
It's a really, really mixed bag, because there's not like a governing council, that hands down material at all. So every local group can be wildly different. The general culture is essentially, oh, you're new, here's some very basic information: how to stand, how to hold the sword, what we expect of you as far as safety. Do you have a cup? Okay, here's the rest of some loner gear, go fence. And then that's it. Maybe for your first couple of years or something, somebody will randomly pull you out of a fight and say, oh, you're doing this wrong, fix it this way. Now go fence. So it is pretty much just show up and spar. Drilling is incredibly rare. Having a specific source is incredibly rare.
Or maybe not even a source, but just like something to call what you do, right? Like, so like having a system that's kind of, self-contained at all. So I guess, because I know that some SCA fencers do exceedingly well and never study any sources, right? And by exceedingly well, I don't mean like they're all, that all of the kings of all of the different regions in the SCA are people who've never studied sources. There's, I
Well,
think,
Kings
probably,
definitely they swing rattan.
Oh, right, yeah. I don't even know your infrastructure.
Yeah, so there's two different combat forms for the most part. There's rattan, which is armored combat, is essentially like a form of Bahurt. And then there's steel, which starts with rapier, and you can get cut and thrust out of it, which then opens up a ton of different weapons. But yeah, back when I started, like I said, we didn't have access to translations, and so it was literally some guy who used to fence epee or saber, usually saber, in college, came out and he beat the crap out of all of us. And so maybe he taught me a couple things, and maybe I'm going to ape what he was doing, but that's what wins tournaments right there. And so that's what everybody would try to do. And there wasn't like a system.
But does that, yeah, well, that's what I was wondering, is like, does that, such as it is, develop into a thing that might be limited, right? Might not cover all the bases, or might not cover all the different variety of weapons or whatever, but like
sometimes
it becomes how you it becomes how people in a certain region fence or whatever.
You can definitely get some of that, and on the extreme end of that is Rob Childs, who started his Black Tigers, and they came up with a system, and then they drilled that system, which was unheard of for the most part in the SCA, and so they've seen tons of success, and Rob Childs has gone on to win whatever tournament he wants. But again, like, he kind of made that up and just used what was working for him, and then trial and error. So it's not exactly historical, but he's using historical weapons in a way that works.
Yeah. So for me, it's sort of those types of examples that make me wonder. So like probably the thing that frustrates me most about the historical fencing project is that for a while it felt like they were the people who were doing HEMA were the only ones with a claim to like any legitimacy, right? Like, or at least there was I felt like there was a kind of general attitude about our swordsmanship. Like, our swordsmanship is more authentic because it's based in these books written by people who were, it's not clear exactly what, but right. And that's how we ground the value of our practice, right? Whereas like in the SCA, I think, or at least we'll say with the cut and thrust or the rapier, your practice is grounded in your success under that particular rule set, right? But I think that there are things that are true about swordsmanship that you learn by doing that, right? And like by getting really good at it too, right? Like I think if you get really good at doing it that particular way, then you learn some truths about what it means to play with swords that particular way, right?
So I could talk for hours about this very specific subject. Because I've got friends that are excellent fencers who've never cracked a historical manual, because they found what worked for them and they developed the rest of their system. Even if they can't define the system, if you ask them questions, eventually you'll pull it out of them. But they've developed what works for them, and it might not look like a manual, but they're making the decisions for all the same reasons.
Right. And that's sort of like, and I was going to talk to you. So Matt, have you done a lot of historical wrestling? I mean, I know that you've competed and that you've, done
not a lot. We ran a Sunday wrestling class for maybe 6 months once. And it was basically just me and Lucas. But as far as like hanging out with someone who knew a lot more than me, no.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that got dismantled by COVID.
Yeah. COVID happened, and we haven't started wrestling back up since COVID started.
Sure. Yeah. So I find my my wrestling, my historical wrestling has informed my BJJ and just my other the various other types of wrestling that I do. My historical wrestling has informed it in a really deep way. A lot of the things are the same. Right. A lot of the things, I mean, I don't know, what do you want to call it, the same, but like it, to my eyes, from my perspective, it's like I relate what they're talking about here to this other concept that exists in this other form and it's all sort of all paths for me lead to the truth, right? Is that like if I study historical wrestling, eventually I'm going to make sense out of it in such a way that it groks with other aspects of my practice. So like my BJJ, for instance, we just say weight distribution, right? So like if I'm trying to trip someone in BJJ, right? Well, they need to have, or sweep someone in BJJ. They need to have their weight in such a way that they have no base, right? So I'm taking them in the direction that they don't have base. Well, there's nothing different about that when you're standing, right? It's just the way that the base forms is different. Now you're using two feet that you're trying to put your center of gravity over, as opposed to a triangle where you've got your knees and your feet, or your post, your hand, and 1 foot and a knee, or like whatever the various configurations are. And the thing with BJJ is super complex because you have so many different configurations. You can post on your head, right? You can stack somebody and you're tripoding on them. All of those are different weight configurations. But the principle for me that you arrive at, right, is you need to pay attention to where the weight is. You also need to pay attention to what's light, right? I'm not going to sweep someone in a direction where they're already heavy on that post, right? I need to catch them when they're light on that post so I can take it out from under them. That's true in wrestling too. But then the way that I take that and I apply it to fencing is I say, okay, that person's weight is on his back leg, right? So what does that mean? That means his forward leg is light. That means he's going to lunge at me if I get into distance where he can reach me with a lunge, right? And so like I've learned I learned that fundamental principle almost of fencing from my practice in BJJ and then my practice in historical wrestling. I don't know, like I don't know if any of this is true or not, but it just seems to be the way the human brain works. Is we learn stuff and then we try and make it make sense with other stuff that we know. You know what I mean?
Whatever the art was that got you paying attention to that detail, it's still a detail that matters everywhere else.
Right. I was on the balcony. I was talking with Anthony Bonomo, and he was talking about how he started applying, because he's doing parkour, which, by the way, you could train. You could like go to parkour school, right? I didn't.
Yeah.
It makes sense, right? Because it's a thing that you could get good at. So it makes sense that there would be a way to do that. But he was saying like, yeah, he just uses his parkour when he's opening doors now, because it's like he knows how to use his body in this stupid way.
See, I use double steps from Meyer, but that's just
right.
Every time I make coffee in the morning, it's a footwork clinic.
If something's slightly out of reach for me, I do try to work my lunge form when I'm
Right. That's so funny. So how about wrestling for the rest of you guys? Are you trying to support Matt here with this?
Yeah. So I hang out whenever there's a wrestling class if I can, and then help explain things.
Right.
Because like that's where my brain works or whatever. Is I don't necessarily want to spend 2 hours a day falling, or any of that. I've already got enough things wrong with me. So I stay out of that. But when I watch, I can see why someone's having trouble with something and walk up and be like, put your weight there.
Oh, yeah.
Or whatever. So I'm just the grumpy old man from the corner that when I get up, I'm about to, start complaining about something. And we seem to have lost Lucas.
He'll be back.
Lucas. All right. What about you, Johan? You doing wrestling?
I would definitely like
You're
to.
built for it. You got the build for it.
At the time that we were running that class, my level of involvement with the club was a little bit different. I have since kind of come to the conclusion that HEMA is a life thing, and I want as much of it as I can possibly soak up, and to do it for as long as possible. So yeah, and to begin with, like a lot of my original martial arts background was in Eastern martial arts, which had more than their fair amount of grappling. So like it's a part of me that I would like to get back to working with again.
Right. What all sources were you studying?
For
ringing.
Yeah. Mainly Jess's book and Tim Hall's Instagram account.
Hell yeah, that's a freaking treatise right there.
But we recently just got 2 copies of the Fabian von Oswald. Yeah. And
this is my actual job at the club.
Yeah, this is his job at the club.
You're talking about this one, or
yeah?
Well, no, I mean like.
Oh no, we got the Mac Armory one.
Oh, I see. Oh, I got you.
And it's amazing. And after seeing it, like someone should just make that a cheap coloring book, because I would love to color all those pictures.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. So, what do you? And have you worked your way through the whole Hours Vault?
I read it all like a month ago. I don't know how much I retained. I'm trying to. Right now, I'm trying to come up with a curriculum where like techniques that are like other techniques we can train on the same day, because he seems to jump around.
So hold on a second. Lucas
said the power died at his house. It's actually storming pretty bad here in Jacksonville right now. He's back.
Let me know if the audio is obnoxious. It's raining here.
Holy moly. It is indeed. I can turn you down.
Oh gosh.
Right.
Okay.
To speak up. Yeah, you're good. That should be better. I think we're okay. Sorry. So you're trying to create your curriculum out of Hours Vault. I feel like for me, the Hours Vault is the best source for trying
and
to
that's the whole thing is is Jess's book is great, and I learned a lot. But we're a historical, we're a HEMA club, so people want to look at the historical book. And if I'm like, I'm using Jess's book as like a cheat sheet, and I'm using Tim Hall's Instagram as a cheat sheet, but I want to actually apply the book as much as I can, because that's what people are looking for, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the one thing that historical fencing and HEMA has to offer that like a lot of these other martial practices and martial arts or schools of martial arts don't necessarily sort of try and emphasize, right? Is that like the activity is not the practice of doing the thing, of like applying the thing. That's not the practice of HEMA. The practice of HEMA is reading the book, right? And talking about what it could mean, right? And that is, I think there's a tremendous value in that, right? Just like, never mind how good of a wrestler you are. Look, if I go wrestle Jordan Burroughs, right? We all know how Jordan Burroughs, Olympic gold medalist, however many times he wants. We all know how that's going to go, right? But what I've learned that he might not know is particular ways that wrestling worked in some particular context, right? And so, for instance, I know how to work from an overwrap grip standing when my opponent's not going to shoot on me, right? I just know how to do that because from what I can tell, they're not shooting on historical wrestlers aren't shooting on each other. They have some double legs, but their knees never touch the ground, right? And also they don't have these collar grips like these judo lapel grabs where you're able to control the whole head. And so you have to wrestle with these arm entanglements all the time, right? Like, and so it leads to a higher degree of competency in these particular down these particular branches. Does that make sense? And so like, then you go to BJJ and you do stand up and you've got an overwrap grip in stand up and your opponent's like, I don't even know what's going on right now, except I don't know what to do from here. Or like someone takes a fork, right? Someone grapevines one of your legs to take a hacking, rather, not a hacking, but they take and they're like, well, I should just do a duck under, right? And take your back, but it's not happening right now because you've got a really tight lap grip and you're grapevining a foot. And so I'm weirdly immobile right now. Right. And where are you going to get that? You're not going to get that from BJJ or folk style. But then you can take it and apply it. And sometimes because the meta is so different, they can't intuit the counter. And so all of a sudden you're hitting moves on people that are maybe even superior wrestlers than you, right? But you're playing this weird mind game with them because they don't know what the hell's going on, right? But have you, so you've been trying to put together your curriculum, you're trying to put together what, how to package Hours Vault.
Yeah, basically it's because I want all the classes to stay in a light theme. I don't want to be teaching. I want to teach them moves that are very similar to each other for an hour, opposed to we're going to do this thing and then we're going to totally switch gears and do this other thing. And I know it's going to evolve. It's going to come out really rough. Our longsword curriculum, we're still fixing it, and it's been 6 years. We're. Yeah. But,
well, it's gone through stages, right? Like the initial stage was like almost a study group, and the core group of us were all working together to figure things out, and and then we came up with our first generation interpretations, and they were great. And we were gods on earth, until we weren't, and we're still going through those cycles where, right, it's actually dumb what we're doing. It's not. We didn't figure anything out.
Iteration's a thing.
That's where like you came in later on, Johan. So you have the newer people that we see come in. They have less bad habits because they don't have to suffer through as much of the trial and error.
And even since my time, there have been quite a number of generations of how we've approached expressing ideas and just phrasing things, communicating things.
I'm still trying to bleed off stuff from, like Matt said, 4 or 5 years ago. I'm like, I'm still doing that dumb habit. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like the wrestling, right? We're gonna have to go through that same cycle with the wrestling material.
And it's back to what James said too about HEMA. HEMA's reading the book, but these people coming to the club, we're reading the book for them. That's the service we're providing. Basically we're allowing them to skip the reading the book stage.
Right. And so that's sort of a perennial question that I have is in what sense? So when I start teaching Hours Vault, right? What I'm really teaching is my understanding of Hours Vault. That's grounded in all this other shit that I've done in my life, right? When Keith, when you start teaching whatever source you're teaching from, you mostly Fabris, right? Or is that right? Or
Capofero? That and Capofero.
Right.
Depending on you start teaching people's preference.
When you start teaching Fabris, right? You're not teaching Fabris, you're teaching fucking Keith, right? That now I'm not saying that you didn't learn a ton of what you do from Fabris, right? But
but it's my presentation of it, yeah.
It's your presentation.
The Rocket Law spec book.
At what point does that become your art? You know what I mean? At what point?
It was I've only within the past year or so found the Vienna Anonymous, which is combining the two that I've been studying in a way that I was already kind of thinking of doing. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that's historical too. So now I have a source from the era that is both of my other sources. I'm in the clear. This is HEMA still. Right. And so now I just kind of, like I said, whenever someone shows that they want to fence a certain way, I'm like, okay, so you need to read Salvador or, stick with Capofero, whatever it is. And then I'm like, okay, but in this position, this guy expresses it this way. So it just becomes a mix. Yeah.
So I find for me, that's kind of what I end up doing is when someone brings their swords. So if someone comes to me with their swordsmanship, such as it is, and they want me to, talk them through things or help bring some things to light that maybe they weren't noticing or whatever, as someone who's interested in the HEMA project and as someone who has to demonstrate my chops, right? Because we're this is a community, so we need to be valid in each other's eyes. And so I have, what I'll invariably do is I'll say, well, this is how it appears. This is how what you're describing appears in this source, right? And this is what Meyer says to do in this particular circumstance. And the fundamental principle here is like, don't go for low targets unless you're working inside your opponent's action that's moving up, right? Or moving to the side. You don't want to initiate in the vor with a low provoker because you're not covering the line, right? And now I start blending all this other stuff together. But what I try and do is I try and at least be able to be knowledgeable enough to show where in whatever particular source I'm on the hook for that idea comes up, right? And
the amount of times I mentioned acting in tempo in the German longsword class is a little disconcerting.
Well, I mean, but like, what are you not going to do? You're gonna purge that concept from your mind,
exactly.
Right? Like you're gonna the well is poisoned, my dude. Right? You might as well just accept it. And so I don't know. That's sort of as an activity. If you want to engage in the HEMA project, then yeah, sure, you can like sit down and open up the book and talk about, right? But when, as you're saying, Matt, right? People are coming and they're paying you to provide this service, right? Maybe not that much, but theoretically they're paying you something to provide that service of like, what is good swordsmanship? And I'm defining that as this stuff that you get from the books. But really what I mean is your version of good swordsmanship that we are all assuming you got from some exploration of the books.
And that's why I like our club, because it's 4 of us plus Dr. Bill. So they're not relying. They're not relying.
There's Dr. Bill. We don't have a Dr. Bill here. This is threw me a curveball. What is this?
He's on a few of our episodes.
We got to re-record the podcast. All right. Got it. All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but so like we all describe stuff differently. We all talk about it differently, and we all have different relationships with different students. So if I can't explain it right to somebody, which is usually the case, one of these other guys can. And eventually, of the 5 of us, they should get it. They should figure it out.
They're getting enough facets of the whatever the heck we're trying to get at. Something's gonna get through.
Yeah. So it's
I think another thing that we do, we're well, maybe not Keith because he's awesome, but we're all pretty vocal about like, look, this is how we see it right now, and this is how we're going to do it, and here's some reasons why. Like, here's some trials and tribulations we went through to get to this interpretation, but none of us are like, this is the way to do it, brother.
Well, so you know what I think is interesting about that is that should be true for every, like we'll say, every black belt of every Asian martial art or jiu-jitsu or whatever, right? Like if Hoyler Gracie comes up to me and he says like, this is a triangle, I'm going to be like, okay, that's definitely a triangle that I know if I picked up all of the important details that he was trying to communicate, I know will work. But that doesn't mean that he's not going to, the way that he expresses what a triangle looks like, or the way that he communicates, or the details that he uses in his practice aren't going to change over time. Of course they're going to change. They're going to get even more better, right? He's going to learn some shit with the arm and how you can like get the shoulder involved or whatever. Like he's going to get these details they didn't have before because he's a human, and we get fucking smarter and better as time goes by, right? So like, but yeah, as HEMAists, we tend to really highlight the fact that we have so little authority, and I wonder if that's a good thing. But I wanted to ask one more question, and kind of to everybody, but also kind of focusing on Johan, is that we're talking about our service that we're providing is we read the book and then we translate it for the student, and that's sort of what we call HEMA. At least that passes for HEMA most of the time. But we all have lots of students that have never opened a book and are just not interested in it, right? And they're sort of like second generation HEMA, right? And how do we view what they're doing, right? For someone who wasn't involved, especially wasn't involved when like, you know, in the early 2000s or mid 2010s, right? Like we all went through this sort of, the project is reading the books and trying to figure out what they mean. But now it seems like there's a good enough sense about what they could mean that often stands on its own merit. People just come to class and they'll learn the thing and they'll feel confident that this is what it is. And they never bother themselves with reading the book. And maybe they don't feel compelled to, or, you know, maybe they don't see this practice as being what, you know, like they showed up. I just want to learn how to sword fate. Like, I don't know what the book says. You know what I mean? But I do want a good instructor that's going to teach me well. And I'd kind of like for that instructor to have read a book. Right. So kind of how do you see that? And then Johan, how was it that you got into reading the book? Was it a cultural expectation or because you came in and a lot of those answers were already given to you, right? What these things mean.
I mean, my natural inclination when I start to do something is I want to do it well. So it was a natural progression, right? Like these wonderful gentlemen here have given me like a basic language with which to explore this art. So, you know, where knowing that and joining that to my personal interests in when it comes to fighting, where does that take me, right? And then dive into a book that is appropriate, that answers that kind of synthesis, and then you know, continue all the other stuff too, because I have to try to be good at everything.
Right.
As far as like the existence of that student, I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that, because like Matt said, you know, you choose your own involvement, and you can have any, you know, of a huge spectrum of reasons for doing HEMA, right? It's not always to contribute to the cause or the anything like that. But of course, I do feel that if you want to get serious, then yeah, reading has to happen, right? So
I think we push it, you know, not aggressively, but you know, we encourage it a lot. We put it out there. You know, today we're working on this technique. You can find it in the 1570 book, and it's a little bit different in the 1568 book. It's really interesting. You should go to Wittenhauer or pick up a copy and check it out. And when I'm running class, I try to read, you know, maybe a couple quotes or a couple lines to support what we're doing. You know, make it entertaining and tie everything back to the source. And
so you say you kind of feel like you're by doing that regularly, by like constantly tying what you're saying into stuff that you can read in the book, that you're sort of incentivizing people, or just creating a culture of like the expectation is what you do should be grounded somewhere in some historical text. Yeah.
And I was born in Canada too, so I can't be non-humble about this stuff. I can't be an unapologetic authority about it. I have to be an apologetic authority about it. You know, I might be wrong. And this is where I got the information from, you know, to try it out, see how does it work for you? Okay, good. That's good. It works. Right. You know?
So what about y'all? Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I just think the HEMA community in general should get okay with there being practitioners who just treat this as a hobby. I feel like there's a stigma that people put on those people who just come in for their hour to just get a little workout in, to feel a little nerdy, to feel cool, and then go home. There should be nothing wrong with that person coming to class. And if
those people are great.
Those people are great. I love those people. Yeah. They're super
Keep the lights
fun. On. And they, you know, they can come to the barbecue and they can ask me weird questions about stuff that's not HEMA related at all. I'm down. Right. But I feel like when we start having conversations about HEMA, we just automatically push those people in the corner and forget that they're there. But they should be a big part of HEMA, because those people are a big part of all the other martial arts. And that's why the other martial arts have grown and become popular. Because you don't have to be the greatest swordsman that ever lived. You just have to have enough of a foundation that you can explain what you're doing to your wife's friend's boyfriend when they come over and you're forced to talk to them, you know?
I do think that some of that pushing away of that crowd occurs in those conversations just due to like effectively language barrier, right? There comes a point in a fencing conversation where you have to have done some reading in order to really get into, you know, the nerdy exchange, right? And if you haven't,
to reach a certain depth, yeah.
Right. But I mean, what I do like about each of our different classes is that each of those facets, we do express kind of our own traversals of the source, and sometimes that clicks in a way that sends somebody down, right? Either their own path to reading, or, you know, if our path jives, then there you go. I mean, that's essentially what happened to me. Was you know, I like these aspects, I want to explore deeper, and I recall these aspects of my previous martial arts background that appeal to me, and I would like to find some expression of that in HEMA. And that's kind of why I expressed any interest in teaching at all.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I don't think I've had any long-term students at all that like haven't read something. That if they stick with it and they really care, they're either going to go read Capo because I keep saying like, oh, it's from this book, from the book, or they'll get tired of hearing about Capo and do like Nolan and go pick up Leonge, or, you know, whatever other source that they see advertised somewhere, and like, oh, this in translation just got published, I'm going to go try that. And then they'll bring it in and be like, oh, look how different this part is. And we start having those conversations. Or something completely unrelated, you know, like Johan decided that he wanted to do I-33 because, you know, he'd been looking at Meyer and Capo with us, and then just suddenly like, no, I want both hands. This is going to be fun.
I mean, I came to, light disclaimer on that, I came from Filipino martial arts. And so advancing with pressuring attacks until you can immobilize your enemy's weapon with a strike, and then tapping it with your offhand to gain control before hitting them for free. It's just Schildt's-Lock.
Did you just like buckler?
Yeah, exactly. So like as soon as that connection was made, I was just like, oh, okay, there we go. But I mean, you know, Keith, as part of that journey, like the amount of commonalities that we found between all of our sources is pretty significant.
That was some of our you and me, Johan. That was some of our first nerdy conversations. Was, you know, going over the parallels between, you know, some Meyer principles and the stuff that you came from.
Yeah, that was a real challenge with longsword structure for me initially.
So the thing that I think is kind of most important for me here is that, like, you're just trying to understand the world, right? Like, we're all just here on this earth, and we're all just trying to make sense out of this crazy shit that's coming flying at our face all the time. And we just get better and better at doing that as time goes by. And then we start to see sort of connections between some things that we understand and other things that we understand, right? And they just kind of, and they grok, and we get better. And there's no, like, I don't want to say like there's an ultimate, like, the truth of swordsmanship, because I don't believe that that's true, right? But like, I do believe that, well, I mean, so I would say as a human, I can't get there anyway, right? So whatever the ultimate truth of swordsmanship is irrelevant to me. But what I can do is like work my damnedest to like get better and better at making all this stuff make sense in a way that's internally coherent and that I can apply in a functional way. Like, and, you know, and so like, but then the other thing too is, this is interesting with regards to what you said, Keith, about how someone who's long-term is going to read the source. Like, that's true about in BJJ too, right? Like, someone who's long-term, they might not read the source. They might not like go and look at what Helio said 80 years ago or whatever. But what they will do is they'll like go on BJJ Fanatics and like look at whatever new instructional just came out and like look, there's hundreds and hundreds of BJJ and instructionals, and something like 40% of them have like collar chokes, right? Like how many times you need to see a collar choke, right? I'll tell you how many times as you can, right? Because go ahead, Matt.
Well, and I think because speaking on that, like I think a lot of times they're not actually searching for the techniques; they're searching for a teacher they like. They're searching for it to be put in a way that relates to them the most. Is this the fun guy? Is this the drill sergeant guy? They're trying to match their self up with a style that will work best for them.
Yeah. They're trying to get a language that they can speak, right? Because to get back to what you were saying, Johan, like it's a language thing. It's like we're trying to communicate with each other, and there's all this subtext everywhere. Everything that we say. The reason this conversation makes sense to us is because we've all lived it, right? But like, if we took someone in here, let's just say straight stick BJJ, right? Who's like, they're going to be like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about. I have no idea. All this stuff is just crazy to me. But I would also say that like hearing that collar choke from the fun guy and the drill sergeant and the nerdy guy who's going to go into every single weed and detail about everything, the more times you experience that, the more understanding you have, right? The more of the world that you can make sense of. The more the chaos of what it is to collar choke somebody becomes ordered in your brain, right? Like, and there are some moments that are like super transformational, right? Someone just says a really pithy 2 lines of an idea, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, all of fucking collar chokes or fencing or rapier or longsword just opened up. My whole world just opened up.
That's similar to what happened with me. You were talking about fueling at the Surfo, and some of the language you use, I can't even remember it now because it's all starting to internalize. But a couple of the statements you made about fueling and how you were interpreting it and how you were applying it, that just the branches from there in my mind just blew up. I've been running with it. But
right, it 6 flow charts and an Excel spreadsheet from it.
So I use that like when you're talking about wrestling and BJJ especially, man. Like fueling is so important, and they don't have a vernacular. They don't have like a language, a shared language where they can talk about. The best I've heard is like there's a offensive version of this technique, or there's a timing version of this technique, right? And that's what you get. And it's like that works, right? But it's not like super sophisticated. It's not like this super robust system of understanding all this interplay between who starts an action first and how quickly you can perform the counteraction and why you should choose some counter actions over others, or why you should resort to a defensive action. They don't have like a super robust framework for dealing with that. Whereas like, Keith and the German guys, we have tempo, and we have mezzo tempo, and we have in tempo, we have indes, vor, knock, strong and weak, and all this stuff is like super, super helpful. And that's another, like, the well is poisoned, right? So I use my HEMA in BJJ, right? I can't not, you know what I'm saying? And when I'm drilling with my training partner, I'm like, no, you got to do that indes. Let me stop for a second. You got to do that. You got to do that while I'm going for this, right? This isn't going to work if you don't do it while I'm going for this. If you let me get to position 2 side control, then you've lost the opportunity for this particular move.
Do you have training partners that are starting to adopt some of that foreign language?
Oh yeah, without question. Without question. Well, I don't like use indes, right? Like sometimes I do. Matt,
I wanted to see some like zombified like German jiu-jitsu school open up where like 3 generations down the line, somebody who's picked up all your HEMA terminology opens their own BJJ school, but it's German now.
Well,
I'm like super interested in that. Matt, I saw you getting ready to say something. I didn't want to.
Well, I was going to say, I think on a previous, I don't know if we actually recorded this conversation, but we've talked about like the reason, talking about fooling in other martial arts might feel weird, because once you start describing it, it sounds very woo woo. It sounds like, you know, you're trying to describe a feeling, which will make it seem unscientific, and which makes it feel like maybe you're doing some kind of weird Asian mysticism thing. You're talking about yin and yang and all that.
Your chi energy,
and people don't seem to like that. So,
no. Especially modern people who are attracted to historical fencing are less interested in the sort of metaphysical stuff.
I think that type of language would help certain people figure it out, but when you're teaching a large group of people, I'm personally, I feel weird describing it that way, because I rather not push the other people away and maybe talk about it that way with the student. I think that'll help with on a one-on-one basis. But like when you were talking about using those fooling in BJJ, once you start to describe it to that guy who doesn't fence, he might think you're crazy. So
sure.
You know.
Well, I mean, yeah. I think that I've worked pretty hard at coming up with a way of translating it, not just into something that's modern versus historical, but also something that's more accessible to a modern, scientifically minded person, rather than someone who's sort of interested in the metaphysical approach and esoteric approach to these kinds of questions. I've come up with some things. I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm just projecting. Maybe everyone thinks I'm fucking crazy. Who knows, man?
Well, we're swords people, so that comes with the territory, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I realized at work, because I used to drive for 14 years. I drove a fort truck at work, and I realized I can drive half asleep with one eye closed, right? And it's cause of fooling. Like I feel every tire. I feel all the pressure. Yeah. I can turn the turn signal on without. I do it before I think about it, and that should be the way you fence, and that should be the way you roll in BJJ. But I think that's great. I haven't put in 14 hours or 14 years of that yet.
I think that's a great way to describe it to just normies, right? Like, I think that's a way that's immediately accessible. You know, someone mentioned to me the other day, when you're driving in a rainstorm, what happens to your body? You know, like when you start hydroplaning, what happens to your body, right? What happens is you start fencing like a buffalo. That's what happens, right? What you should do is fucking relax the way that you have been the entire time before that started. But you don't know how to make sense of the world yet, right? That's a new phenomena that you don't know. If you behave some certain way, that everything's going to be okay, right? So you got to actually have that experience. You got to go fucking hydroplane several times, right? And know that, like, okay, I can relax some of the tension in my shoulders, you know, like, I'm going to make it through. I just need to be careful where I drive. I need to watch the road. You know what I'm saying? Something's coming up. I'm going to give it a little bit. But, you know, when that person mentioned it to me, I hadn't thought like, oh, wait, when I go like this, because I'm hydroplaning, it's not helping anything, right? Like, it's just making it harder for me.
Be more injured if you wreck.
Right. It's just, and it's going to make it harder for me to respond to actual real shit that could potentially cause a wreck. Right. Yeah. So it's like, it's unequivocally the wrong way of approaching the problem, but we don't know that because we haven't experienced it enough yet to found exactly what it requires, and just to be present in that moment and respond with exactly as much as it needs.
Yeah. We've been doing a lot of slow work with newer people, and you end up, because that's their reaction, right? If you throw them into sparring, you just put this jacket and this helmet on, they're just gonna
right.
But when you start doing real slow work with them, and like glacial slow, like ridiculously comically slow, and they can start seeing the interaction of things and actually use fueling and stuff. And then those are some of my favorite moments with like brand new people, newer people, less experienced people, whatever, where it starts to look like a sword fight. You start to look like the plates on the, in the Meyer book or whatever, because you're giving them the enough time to react appropriately.
So they choose the right reactions, right?
Yeah. If you hydroplaned it, a mile and a half an hour, you could probably not freak out like, oh, this is a teacup ride. Okay, I guess I could just turn my wheel this way, or
Right. And the other thing,
literally what I did to learn how to drive a sports car. Except not that slow, because you can't. But yeah.
Well, but the thing is, like, you don't just take, you also don't just take someone who's learning how to drive and send them into a thunderstorm, right? You take them into a parking lot. You say, look, we're just going to do circles, and and we're going to go pretty slow, and it's going to be fine. Because
my dad put me in a go-kart and let me wreck a few times.
There you go. That's probably not okay, actually. But I mean, I don't know. You seem to work out okay for you. So
I think I learned how to drive in a crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, listen, guys. So we're running up on our time. I had such a blast. Yeah, things went by super quick, especially that last 25 minutes. Things really started to move. But thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It would have been terrible if you weren't here, because it would have just been me.
I probably still would have listened. Yeah.
So, and I just want to remind the audience that these guys are Bold City Longsword. Bold City Longsword, is that right?
Yep. Yeah. Florida.
Yeah, and they're the hosts of the Swords and Stereo HEMA podcast, and they got all sorts of really awesome content. A ton of what you got?
Yeah, that's our logo.
Oh, there it is. Oh yeah, there it is, right there. Nice. Who came up with that logo? What is
that is Jack Burton's T-shirt from Big Trouble in Little China. But I changed it.
Yes.
I changed it to Lichtenau.
To Grandmaster Janis Lichtenauer and a bunch of feathers and
it pretty much expresses what we're all about right there.
That's freaking so cool. I love that so much.
And just for anybody who's gonna, saunter over to Swords and Stereo podcast, viewer discretion.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
They're gonna get. Well, so at least they didn't get me demonetized. But anyway, all right. So listen, thanks again, guys. It was a real blast to have you, and we'll see everyone else next week. And I'm hoping that we get you on another time. Hopefully, Jess will be involved with the next one, and take care.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for having us.